Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
When I was a kid, my grandfather lost all his savings to a phone scam. He had spent his whole life working as a mechanic and saving every penny, but one day, a scammer tricked him into paying fake taxes for a prize that didn't even exist. It was heartbreaking to watch. That experience shaped me in ways I never expected. I went to college for cybersecurity and now work for a mid-sized company handling their digital security. Part of my job involves educating employees about common scams and how to avoid them. So yeah, I know all the tricks these scammers use. My work phone rings constantly. Most calls are legitimate. Colleagues with questions, vendors with updates, the usual business stuff. But occasionally I get those special calls. The ones from people trying to separate others from their hard-earned money. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my work phone rang twice in quick succession. Same number both times. Now, legitimate callers usually leave a message if it's important, but I decided to call back anyway. It could have been a client with an urgent security issue. When I answered, I introduced myself as the company's cybersecurity representative. The scammer immediately launched into an excited spiel, claiming he was calling from Publishing Clearinghouse with excellent news. He told me I had been selected as their grand prize winner of $5 million. His accent was thick, and I could hear multiple people talking in the background. Classic call center environment. I immediately knew what was happening but decided to play along for a minute. I expressed surprise at winning and mentioned that I had never entered any contest. The scammer quickly assured me that no entry was needed because my phone number had been randomly selected from all registered United States citizens. He then said he needed some information to verify my identity before processing my winnings. I agreed to provide information and asked what he needed. The scammer said he first needed to confirm my name and address. This is where I decided to have some fun. I gave him a fake name, John Smith, and commented that he should already know that since he had called me. The scammer confidently confirmed the fake name and then asked for my address. I proposed a better idea. I told him if I really won $5 million, I make a deal to split it with him, giving him $2,500,000 cash if he could just tell me my real name, which I had already told him when he answered. There was a pause, and I could hear him frantically shuffling papers. The scammer hesitantly guessed that my name was Robert Johnson. I burst out laughing. I mocked him for not even knowing who he was calling, yet somehow I had won his fake contest. I told him he was a terrible scammer. His tone changed instantly. The scammer cursed at me and accused me of wasting his time. I fired back that he was the one wasting people's time and stealing from vulnerable people who don't know better. I mentioned people like my grandfather who lost everything to scum like him. We exchanged a few more colorful words before he hung up on me, but something in me snapped. I thought about my grandfather and all the other elderly people who get taken advantage of by these operations. These scammers count on making hundreds of calls, hoping to find a few vulnerable targets. They're used to people hanging up, but what they're not used to is someone turning the tables. So I called him back, and then I called again, and again, and again. For the next hour, I hit redial over and over. Sometimes he'd ignore it, sometimes he'd answer and immediately hang up. But every few calls, he'd pick up. During one call, the scammer angrily told me to stop calling and threatened to report me to the police. I retorted that I was sure the police would love to hear from someone running a phone scam operation. Another time, the scammer asked what was wrong with me and called me crazy. I explained I was just giving him a taste of his own medicine and asked how it felt to be on the receiving end of unwanted calls. In yet another call, the scammer started to threaten that he would find me, but I cut him off. I assured him that no, he wouldn't find me, but I would keep finding him every time he tried to scam someone. After about an hour and over 100 calls, I decided to take a break, but I saved his number in my contacts as scammer to torment. Every now and then, when I'm waiting for a meeting to start or have a few minutes to kill, I give him a ring. Sometimes he answers, sometimes he doesn't. But I know I've made an impact because now He often hangs up immediately when he hears my voice. Every minute he spends dealing with me is a minute he's not scamming someone's grandparent out of their life savings. Plus, it's genuinely entertaining to turn the tables on someone who makes a living by preying on others. So if you're a phone scammer reading this, be careful who you call. Some of us bite back. I inherited my grandpa's farm about 3 years ago. It's about 40 acres of beautiful countryside with a small herd of cattle, some chickens, and one mean old bull named Thunder. Grandpa always warned me about Thunder. He ain't mean-spirited, but he don't like strangers, and he sure as hell don't like being touched. I've been running the farm by myself since then. It's hard work, but honest. The farm sits back about half a mile from the county road, with a long gravel driveway leading up to it. I've got no trespassing and private property signs posted everywhere because the liability of having a working farm with livestock is no joke. Yesterday started like any other Sunday. I was in the barn fixing some equipment when I heard car doors slamming. That was weird because I wasn't expecting anyone. I stepped outside and saw a shiny white SUV parked near the cattle pen. There was this woman standing by the fence with 3 kids. One was around 11 years old, and the other 2 looked younger, maybe 7 or 8. The woman was taking pictures while the 2 younger kids were running toward my chicken coop, and the older boy was climbing the fence into the pen where Thunder was grazing. I immediately started running toward them, waving my arms. I yelled for them to stop and get away from there. The woman turned and looked at me like I was the one trespassing. She told me in a dismissive tone that they were just taking some nice farm pictures for her Instagram, and that the kids wanted to see some animals up close. I was getting closer but still too far away. The older boy was already inside the pen and the woman was urging him toward Thunder. She encouraged her son to climb on the bull's back, saying it would make a cute picture. I shouted for her to stop and get her son out of there immediately, warning her that it was a bull, not a cow. I could see Thunder starting to paw the ground, lowering his head. Anyone who knows bulls knows that's a warning sign. The woman just rolled her eyes at me. She dismissed my concerns, saying I was being dramatic and insisting the cow looked perfectly safe. That's when it happened. The younger kids were throwing sticks at my chickens, causing them to scatter in panic. Thunder heard the commotion, saw the strange kid approaching him, and did what bulls do when threatened. He spun around with incredible speed for an animal his size and kicked out with his back legs. The woman had climbed halfway into the pen to help her son get on Thunder's back when those powerful hooves connected with her chest and stomach. She flew backward about 6 feet and crumpled to the ground. The boy, startled by the sudden movement, fell backward off the fence and landed hard on his back. I finally reached them and immediately jumped the fence to get to the boy. Thunder was still agitated, but he knew me and kept his distance as I dragged the kid to safety. The woman wasn't moving, and the 2 younger children were screaming and crying now. I asked the boy if he was okay and if he could breathe. The boy was crying but nodded. He had the wind knocked out of him and what would probably be some nasty bruises, but by some miracle, he seemed okay. I pulled out my phone and called 911. I explained to the emergency operator that I needed an ambulance at Willow Creek Farm off County Road 23, telling them a woman had been kicked by a bull and a child was injured, and asked them to hurry. Then I turned to the other kids. I told them their mom was hurt but help was coming and instructed them to stay right where they were and not move. The next 30 minutes were chaos. The ambulance arrived followed by the sheriff. The woman was still unconscious when they loaded her onto a stretcher. One of the paramedics checked out the boy. The paramedic told me that the boy had some bruising but no signs of serious injury. He recommended taking him in for x-rays just to be safe. The sheriff pulled me aside while the kids were being attended to. He asked me to explain what had happened. I explained everything. How they had trespassed onto my clearly marked private property. How the woman had encouraged her child to climb on a bull. How I had tried to stop them but couldn't get there in time. The sheriff asked if I wanted to press charges for trespassing. I looked over at those kids, terrified and watching their mother being loaded into an ambulance. I told them no, saying I thought they'd been through enough today. I added that the woman had learned a harder lesson than any court could give her. The sheriff nodded in understanding. He mentioned they would still need my statement for the report, though. Later, I found out from the sheriff that the woman had several broken ribs and a concussion but would recover. The boy had some bruising but was otherwise fine. It was truly a miracle he wasn't seriously hurt or worse. Apparently, she'd told the hospital staff that I had invited them to see the animals, but changed her story when confronted with the fact that her kids had admitted they just stopped by the farm without permission because they wanted to see the animals. It's been a few days now. I installed security cameras at the entrance to my property and reinforced all my fencing. I feel bad for those kids. They were just doing what their mother told them to do, but I still shudder thinking about what could have happened. Thunder could have killed that boy, or the woman for that matter. I guess some people need to learn the hard way that no trespassing signs and farm animals aren't just suggestions and photo props. They're serious business. My spouse and I have been trying to have a baby for some years now, and we had one pregnancy about a year ago. I still remember the joy we felt when we saw those two pink lines. We were cautiously excited, knowing the risks, but allowing ourselves to hope. Then at 9 weeks, I started bleeding. The ultrasound confirmed what we feared. There was no heartbeat. I don't think I've ever cried so much in my life. After taking some time to heal both physically and emotionally, we decided to try again. Now, after months of treatments, I'm pregnant again. Today was our first ultrasound. It's still very early, but everything looks good so far. The fertility clinic we go to has been with us through this entire journey. The doctors and most of the staff know our history. They've seen our tears, heard our worries, and celebrated our small victories with us. This certain department has seen us countless times over the years, or so I thought. Usually before any appointment, a nurse checks you in, takes your vitals, and reviews your chart. Today, a nurse I hadn't seen before called us back. She seemed friendly enough as she took my blood pressure and started going through the routine questions. Then, while looking directly at my chart, she asked if this was my first pregnancy. I blinked at her, confused. I asked her what she meant, thinking maybe I'd misheard her. This information was right there in my file. The nurse repeated her question with an even bigger smile, asking again if this was my first pregnancy. I told her no, this was my second pregnancy. I tried to make my tone clear enough that she might take the hint, but instead she cooed and asked how old my little one was. I took a deep breath before answering. I told her hesitantly that my baby didn't make it. Finally, realization dawned on her face. She looked back down at my chart, her eyes growing wide as she obviously spotted the information she should have seen before asking. She stammered awkwardly, saying that hopefully this one would be good news. She laughed nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation she'd created. Normally, I'm pretty stoic about answering these questions. After going through this for so long, you develop a thick skin. But something about her carelessness really got to me, so I decided to ham it up a little. I started sniffling and wiping at my eyes. Not full-on crying, but just enough to make her realize the impact of her words. My spouse caught on to what I was doing and stayed silent, letting me handle it my way. The nurse avoided all eye contact after that, rushing through the rest of her duties before practically running out of the room. After she left, my spouse asked me if that performance was really necessary. I replied that maybe it wasn't, but she needed to learn to read patients' charts before asking sensitive questions. My spouse acknowledged that was fair, but expressed concern that I might have made things awkward with the doctor. I responded that if she did make things awkward, I would deal with it. I added that people working in fertility clinics should know better. When our doctor came in a few minutes later, she was the compassionate professional we'd come to trust. She acknowledged our past loss briefly, celebrated our current progress, and focused on moving forward with hope but appropriate caution. The ultrasound itself was amazing. Seeing that tiny flicker of a heartbeat made everything else fade away temporarily. My spouse squeezed my hand so tight it almost hurt, but I didn't mind. We both had tears in our eyes, the good kind this time. On our way out, I spotted the nurse at the station still looking mortified. Part of me felt a little bad for embarrassing her, but not enough to apologize. When you work with patients dealing with infertility and pregnancy loss, you need to be careful and thorough. Reading the chart before asking potentially painful questions is just basic professional courtesy. Our journey is hard enough without having to explain our loss to someone who should already know better. As for us, we're cautiously optimistic about this pregnancy, one day at a time, one appointment at a time, and hopefully with more attentive medical staff going forward. I grew up during the 1960s. Our family was pretty typical for the time: mom, dad, me, and my two younger siblings. My father worked as a foreman at the local factory, and he was a man of routine. He valued family time above all else, especially dinner. That was sacred to him, the one time of day when all of us would sit together and talk about our day without any interruptions. But there was one persistent annoyance that plagued our family dinners: telemarketing calls. Back then, we didn't have caller ID or answering machines, so when the phone rang, you had to answer it. And for some reason, telemarketers seemed to have a sixth sense about when families would be sitting down to eat. The worst offenders were the aluminum siding companies. They'd call almost every single night right as my mother was putting food on the table. My father would curse under his breath, push back from the table, and stomp over to the phone mounted on our kitchen wall. The conversations were always the same. My father would answer the phone with a simple greeting. The salesperson would enthusiastically introduce themselves as being from an aluminum siding company and ask if my father had time to hear about their amazing deals. My father would explain that he was eating dinner with his family and that we had a brick house. The salesperson would try to persuade him by mentioning that their special offer was ending soon. My father would repeat that we had a brick house before saying goodbye and hanging up. Then he'd sit back down and mutter something about these people while aggressively cutting into his meatloaf. This went on for months. Different companies, different salespeople, but always the same pitch. My father tried everything. He tried explaining that we had a brick house. He tried being polite. He tried being firm. He even tried hanging up immediately. Nothing worked. The calls kept coming night after night, interrupting our family dinners. One memorable company had been calling for weeks. They were the most persistent of them all. The same salesperson would call every other day, seemingly forgetting that my father had already explained multiple times that aluminum siding wouldn't work for our house. Then came the night that changed everything. We were all sitting down to a pot roast my mother had spent hours preparing. My father had just said grace when the phone rang. The familiar look of irritation crossed his face, but instead of his usual grumbling, he got a strange glint in his eye. My father announced that he would answer the phone. He walked to the phone and we all prepared for the usual quick dismissal. But that's not what happened. My father answered the call and confirmed it was him speaking. There was a pause, and I expected him to cut the caller off with his usual brick house line. But instead he pulled up a chair next to the phone. My father asked the caller to tell him more about the aluminum siding they were selling. My mother, siblings, and I all exchanged confused looks. Was Dad actually entertaining a sales pitch during dinner time? This was unheard of. We could hear the faint, excited voice from the receiver as the salesperson spoke. My father responded thoughtfully, saying that was interesting and asking what kind of warranty the siding came with. For the next 20 minutes, we sat in bewildered silence, our dinner getting cold, as my father asked detailed questions about aluminum siding. He inquired about colors, styles, durability, installation processes, and financing options. He sounded genuinely interested, and the salesperson on the other end was clearly thrilled. My father asked if the siding came in forest green, noting that would match our shutters nicely. He also asked if it was really guaranteed for 20 years against fading. My mother silently asked me what he was doing, but I could only shrug. I had never seen this side of my father before. After a thorough conversation that covered every aspect of aluminum siding, my father's tone suddenly shifted. He told the salesperson that everything sounded wonderful and that he'd love to have them come out for an estimate, but mentioned he had just one question before they proceeded. The salesperson replied with a faint voice we couldn't fully make out. My father asked how exactly the aluminum siding would get attached to brick. There was a long pause on the line. We could all hear the confusion in the salesperson's voice when he finally responded. The salesperson explained that aluminum siding was not meant for a brick house and then asked if my father had a brick house. That's when my father exploded. His face turned as red as our brick exterior as he stood up from his chair. He shouted that yes, we did have a brick house, and he knew damn well the siding wouldn't stick to brick. He angrily explained that he'd been telling them this over a dozen times, hoping they'd stop calling. He slammed the phone down so hard I thought he might break it. Then he walked back to the table, sat down, and picked up his fork as if nothing had happened. My mother asked if that outburst had really been necessary. My father simply replied that yes, it was. That company never called us again. Neither did any of the other aluminum siding companies. Word must have gotten around somehow, because our dinner interruptions decreased significantly after that night. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.